Hi everyone, welcome and thanks for joining today's Choose Your Own Hackventure session. My name is Faith from the Sophos marketing team, and we'll get things kicked off very shortly here as we give everyone a few more seconds to trickle in. We've definitely got a jam-packed session today from CDW Canada and Sophos. So first we'll hear from CDW Cybersecurity Advisor Mitch Kelsey, and then we'll dive right into our live hack session, which will be led by two of our Sophos security experts, Andrew and Brandon. So we hope you've had a chance to grab some coffee and are ready and excited to help us on this hack venture today. Please feel free to use the Q&A tab if you have any questions during the session. We'll try to get to all of them, but if we don't get to your question during today's broadcast, we'll be sure to follow up with you via email afterwards. So without further ado, I will pass it along to Mitch to kick us off today.
Thank you, Faith, for the introduction, and thank you all for joining. I had a sneak peek of what you're going to be able to run through today, and I'm very excited for it. It should be a great opportunity. So let's talk about who I am. So my name is Mitch Kelsey. I'm a cybersecurity advisor here with CDW Canada. I represent a risk advisory services practice, which primarily is concerned for all those non-solution specific security concerns you might have. So related to the conversation today, our offensive security practice, but we also specialize in governance, risk, and compliance consulting and vulnerability management as well. I'm CW Canada's Tenable Guardian. My background's a little bit different than many in our organization. I got my start in security actually in national security and counterterrorism consulting. And so I like to think about security from a threat modeling and security systems perspective. So I try to bring as much as I can of that to the conversations I have with customers. When I'm not talking about cybersecurity and when we're not dealing with a global pandemic, you can find me playing soccer outside, working in the kitchen, or spending time with my wife, my two little boys, and my bulldog, Hank. So let's talk about offensive security and sort of the spectrum that organizations can move towards. So when we're first talking to an organization about where they should start to get an initial baseline understanding of their environment, that's often done with what's called a vulnerability assessment. So that perspective is really to get a clear baseline of your position today. It's usually focused on one particular domain, and exploitation is out of scope. So really what we're doing is getting an inventory and an understanding of the vulnerabilities you have to help an organization build a roadmap towards remediation. It's very methodological. It's more informative than it is comprehensive. And it's noisy. It's not intended to be stealthy because our focus is more on doing an assessment of the environment to give you that understanding of what to do next. Once organizations have that in place, that's where we can help them move to the next step, which involves penetration testing. That's where we're looking not only at that baseline, but understanding an organization's security posture. Again, it's often focused on one particular domain. So it might be your external network attack surface or a specific web application that you're concerned about. It often happens when an organization goes through a major change. As an example, last year with COVID, many organizations that needed to make significant network changes reached out to us and asked us to validate those changes with penetration testing. As a best practice, organizations also do it on an annual basis to keep that security posture updated and continue that continuous improvement. For organizations that do this on a continuous basis and are looking towards how to better improve their security capabilities, and focus less on technical vulnerabilities where outdated software or misconfigurations might be the concern, to focusing more on the organization's blue team's processes, their detection and response capabilities, to really understand what an attacker could do and get a early lead on that attack chain as early as possible. Those conversations lead more towards what's called a red teaming engagement, or where the red team is working in concert with the blue team, what's called a purple team engagement. These tend to be multi-domain, where we're looking as comprehensively as possible about a security environment for a customer. So that could include physical security concerns, social engineering, or sometimes bypassing physical security controls. Also network and application layer as well. We want to get as comprehensive a viewpoint as possible. Different than those other two types of assessments, this is more of an opportunistic and selective test. The team wants to be covert because the focus is demonstrating what an attacker could do and seeing how well the defensive team is able to catch it and ideally block it or catch it after it's happened and remediate it as quickly as possible. These engagements also tend to happen over a longer period of time because stealth is important. An attacker, typically speaking, is going to have a relatively long dwell time in your environment before they take those actions on objectives. And as much as possible, our team wants to demonstrate that to see over a longer period of time, can the blue team detect and ideally eradicate the threat? So why is a manual penetration test important, which is the methodology that our own team uses? Um, there's a number of reasons why organizations must conduct penetration testing. For organizations that collect cardholder data, for an example, PCI expects you to conduct penetration testing. Or for organizations that build their own applications, on major builds, it's a best practice to do that as well. But there's some reasons why you should do a manual test, and that's where I'm going to focus my time. At the end of the day, my job is to make my penetration testers' jobs and the attackers' jobs as hard as possible, and ideally make it harder every time. So some of the areas of focus that I think bring additional value when you're looking beyond those technical vulnerabilities is that organizations should be conducting continuous vulnerability management as a best practice so that you can start to shrink your attack surface. Those out of life or perhaps outdated software or misconfigurations that you might initially find from those first couple scans, once those are removed, you can start to focus on those likely attack paths to harden them and frustrate potential attackers earlier in the attack chain. Another aspect is that a manual test is going to illustrate risks to the business that a vulnerability scanner can't detect. A great example of this is information leakage about your organization. If you have leaked credentials where a user might have used their corporate credentials on a third-party service that got hacked, we've all seen Have I Been Pwned, or most recently with the big Facebook leak, this information is out there about organizations. And that information is something that we're not talking about default credentials, we're talking about what an organization has used outside of the business and what could potentially be leveraged against the organization. Also, potential targeting intelligence, understanding what information might be exposed about the business in terms of the technology sets that you use, or maybe gaps that are identified based on things people are posting online, or data exposure. Maybe there's information that's available online that really shouldn't be. Perhaps a storage bucket is open in a way that it shouldn't be, allows an attacker to better understand an environment in a way that they shouldn't. And that sort of information is leveraged in a manual penetration test more effectively. The other piece of that is understanding your attack surface. So fileless malware is increasingly leveraged by ransomware attackers, other determined attackers, where they're not necessarily dropping malware that's easily detected based on some file footprint. They're leveraging tools that are built into the operating systems themselves. Within Windows, they're called lol bins, which is living off the land binaries, which means tools that are built into the way that Windows works that are used for malicious purposes. If you're not looking for those things from a traditional vulnerability assessment perspective, you're likely going to miss the malicious use that's being carried out that way. It also helps you uncover organizational vulnerabilities beyond those software and misconfigurations. A great example of this is on internal network testing for directory services such as Active Directory. Many organizations need that to allow users and services to be able to have the privileges that they need. And it's often the first point that an attacker is going to access once they get onto the internal network to either move laterally or gain privileges. And that's an area where today individual vulnerability scans haven't done a great job of being able to uncover some decisions that you made in terms of trust about your organization, that doing that manual inspection can really help. The other area is unstructured data. Again, not something that you're necessarily going to pick up in a scan, but if people have either old configuration files or perhaps database copies, or even hopefully not sticky notes on their desktop for usernames and passwords, that is often leveraged as part of an attack as well. Finally, it provides a determined attacker's perspective outside and inside your network. So when our team takes a look at what vulnerabilities that they're able to uncover, they're not just looking at the highs and criticals that you would want to patch from a risk perspective, but may not be the attack chain that they would most effectively use to be able to get their next step. If they're able to chain together a number of lows and mediums to be able to get to the same objective, that's very valuable information as an organization for you to understand. Additionally, there are exploits out there beyond what you're going to have in those mature Metasploit modules that you're often going to see for people using Kali Linux. So those things are certainly great. They tend to be very stable, and they're very useful when it comes to penetration testing. But as you may see from the Sophos team later on, some of those attacks can be picked up by antivirus. And there's others that if you're able to manipulate those exploits, that it might go undetected. And that information, again, is very valuable to have. Let's talk about a couple considerations for choosing a penetration testing partner that's going to help maximize the value proposition of the engagement. Here's a couple of questions that you should be asking your penetration testing team, and they should have these answers available to you. So from a methodology and approach perspective, does the organization leverage a referenceable framework to conduct penetration testing? It should be really clear in terms of what they're using and how they're basing their findings to be able to demonstrate that to you. From a process perspective, do they follow best practices and your individual requirements concerning rules of engagement, destructive testing, and reporting SLAs for significant vulnerabilities? I hear occasionally organizations saying, yeah, a penetration tester came in, they brought a laptop, and they just got to work. And it took down, a service that we had. That's a problem. And that's why those very clear processes are in place to ensure that testing can be done safely, and it's going to follow your expectations in terms of reporting and timelines for testing. From a reporting perspective, are you able to get your hands on sample reporting? Having taken a look, is the executive summary and narrative clear for non-technical audiences? Is it very easy for you to share with somebody who's not a security professional and have them understand what's happening? For the technical findings, are they really clearly documented? Are they assigned CVSS scores? Is there that additional information that you would have to understand the remediation that's being recommended? And are you able to reproduce it effectively? Finally, from a qualifications perspective, are you able to ask them their evaluation criteria for hiring and training their team members? And also, what certifications do members possess, and what is their expectations for ongoing development? Offensive security is a cat and mouse game, and it's important for your testing team to continue to develop their skill sets to keep up with what's happening with the changes in security, and demonstrating that as an important value proposition as part of these engagements. So a little bit about our team. So I talked at the beginning about penetration testing. So we think about security from that risk-based perspective. And depending on where you are, that can start with a baseline understanding to help you understand where you are today, or it can help you build towards a target objective. And if this is something that comes up in the future and our team might be able to provide some additional assistance, I'd be more than happy to have a follow-up phone call with anybody who would be interested in speaking further. So just to introduce the Sophos team, I think it's important to mention that CDW is Sophos's largest partner here in Canada. And we have a longstanding partner relationship at the highest level of the Sophos partner program. So we'd be more than happy to have a follow-up conversation if you're as excited about this follow-up presentation as I'm going to be about how we might be able to help introduce you to the Sophos team and help support the best we can. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to the Sophos team.
Great, thanks, Mitch. Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew. I'm one of the engineers here at Sophos, joined today by my colleague, Brandon. I'm just going to get my screen share going. And you know what? Let's get that video started as well. So hopefully you can all see me. Hi. So this is Andrew, and we're so pleased to have everybody here today for the Choose Your Own Hackventure. Like you just heard, oh, actually, before I get started, the slide you've got on screen, Faith, this is your least favorite part of the presentation, because this is the official marketing approved one. Faith, do blinkers here. This really doesn't put us in the mood for what we need to do today, right? We need a little bit more adventure. I mean, this shirt actually has epaulets, so this is definitely not going to cut it. Let's see if we got a little something better. Oh yeah, there we go. That's what we're in the mood for today. So this is Choose Your Own Hackventure. And like you just heard from Mitch, we need you to help us conceive and execute a targeted attack. So whatever cap you might be wearing, if you're wearing if it's a sports team or anything like that, we need to take that off and put on your virtual red team hats right now, because that's what we're going to have you help us through this afternoon. And the way we're going to guide through that is by using the kill chain that was published by Lockheed Martin. So we're going to step through each of these stages and just talk a little bit about what happens at each of these stages. And we're going to be using the polling functions in Zoom to actually have you guide us through. And the first way that we're going to do that is with Recon. So this kind of, even outside of the technology or tools and techniques space right now, all we need to do is figure out who would be a good target. And we've got a little bit of a short list for you. If we take a look at our 3 different contenders here, we've got Philip, we've got Joshua, and we've got Karen. Now, we've broken down their profiles to give you a little bit of information about where we've been able to find that they work, what role they have there, and what kind of posting they tend to do on social media, because we think that's going to be a really interesting way for us to kick off with the Recon. And speaking of kicking off, Faith, I'm going to hand back to you to fire up our first poll of the afternoon.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. So as Andrew mentioned, this is your first opportunity to help us out today. So we need you to vote in this poll to figure out who we should target on today's Hackventure. So I'm going to launch this poll right now. And you can see on the screen the different characteristics of each target. So let's see. We've got 19 people voted. Philip's in the lead so far, followed closely by Joshua. Looks like Philip might take the lead. See if we can get a few more people to vote here. We're at 77%. All right, I think we've got just about everyone voted, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. It looks like Philip is going to be our target today.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Faith. Great job on the Kentucky Derby as well. I love your work. Can even get a hint of the mint juleps there. So let's jump in and take a little bit more of a look at Philip. So let's see. What do we know about Philip? We know he's a CFO. He works over at the ABC company, and we can see that he likes to post some stuff up on social media. He's loving the Ozarks. That's no spoilers, please. Either for me, I've not seen that one at all. Power BI, who doesn't love Power BI these days? But you know, this one's near and dear to my heart. He also likes to fly, or at least likes to drink red wine in the Delta Lounge. Maybe a combo of both of those things. It's been so long since I was on a plane. I think that's a really good way for us to use some social engineering. I know I'm definitely excited for the next flight I'm planning to take, and maybe Philip is as well. So with that, let's just talk about one quick thing, and that is we're going to cut over to a demo in a second, and when we do, we're going to turn off the majority of the protections inside of our agent. That makes it way more fun for all of the stuff that we want to do. The only reason we're able to do that is because our tamper protection has been turned off. So what you're about to see is not a normal scenario. And with that, let's bring up those machines and let's talk a little bit about what you can see. So on the right-hand side, you can see our Kali Linux machine. Mitch mentioned that as a great tool a little bit earlier. And on the left, we've got a protected Windows 10 machine. Now, let's just show you some of that disabling that we did. We turned a lot of stuff off here, again, because of that tamper protection. We've also tweaked some other stuff under the hood. So with that, let's start our attack. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up Outlook. Yep, it sounds a little bit cliche, but email is still one of the vast majority of ways that attackers find their way into organizations. And let's take a look at the phishing email that we have here for Philip. Well, you know, this is exactly what he was hoping for. What's better than being able to travel when you're traveling with your companion, going and getting that glass of red wine in the Sky Club? And here, Delta is offering 2 free access vouchers. Excellent. That really sounds like something I would want to do as well. we can see some classic phishing language in here, some compelling things. All you need to do, this is a limited time offer, all of that kind of stuff. So let's act like an enthusiastic flyer. Let's get that email open, and let's see what it says. Okay, urgent confirmation needed. More immediacy, more urgency there. Let's follow those instructions. It says to get these free passes, I need to click enable editing, and then I need to click enable content. And let's just take a look, see, do we see anything happen on this machine? As far as the end user is concerned, nothing's happened on this machine, no changes. But over on our Kali Linux side, we can clearly see we've just established that connection. Our hacker is a productive hacker, so that was the third open session that they have there. So with that, now that we've got this session, we need to decide what's the very first thing that we should do. And we need your help again. So Faith, I'm going to pass back to you again to talk about maybe what should we do first?
All right, so we're going to go ahead with the second poll. So what action should we take first? Should we escalate privileges? Should we steal credentials? Or should we stage persistence? So the poll is launched, so just making sure everyone's still awake and ready to go out there. Let's see. Looks like stage persistence has taken an early lead here, followed not so closely by steal credentials. So let's see. Got a good amount of people voting. It looks like stage persistence is taking the lead here. So that is going to be our first action.
Persistence. That is great. So the good news with this is for those of you, the 20% of you who wanted to escalate privileges, we actually have enough time. We'll show you both of those. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about what we're going to do. We're going to jump in and start interacting with this session. So Brandon's going to jump in and take us straight into our session there. And well, actually, the escalate privileges piece, that should be pretty straightforward. There's a built-in script right here in Meterpreter called get system. So we're just going to go ahead and run that. And that didn't work. Okay. We're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. We'll run another command here. What that's going to do is it's going to give us a bunch of information. It's going to tell us the build of the machine, the language, the architecture of the CPU. Now, what we would need to do, and it's a good job there's so many of you out there because we can break it up and have everybody help out here, is we need to take that information out to something like the exploit database and start finding some good, interesting vulnerabilities for us to use. But actually, Brandon, I think I remember you saying you had a bit of a better way. So maybe I'll hand over to you to tell us about this clever idea you've got.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. So as Andrew mentioned, fortunately, the Kali gods have realized how lazy we all are. And they've given us this nice little program that we can run where we can essentially just say run post. And if I can type, it's going to be a heck of a lot better, of course. Bear with me for a second. There we go. And then we're going to do Recon and local exploit suggester. Now, as this thing runs, essentially it's going through that exploit database and it's looking at all the vulnerabilities tied to this specific session, i.e. the vulnerabilities associated with this Windows machine. And it's going to match them up to different exploits within the exploit database to give us kind of the best options, the most likely to succeed exploits that we can utilize to try and gain permissions, steal credentials, a whole number of different things. So you see that list building now. Now, of course, this is a demo and we have done a lot of testing, and it just so happens that this particular one right here is pretty successful. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to background this session because I actually have to target session 3 now. And I'm going to use this exploit. And I'm going to say here, let's make this even easier and just paste it in there because again, I'm a lazy hacker. I'm going to set the session to be 3, and then the best command ever, exploit. Now, as this kicks off, it's actually attacking via session 3 and attempting to gain a privileged session, which we now see as session 4. And if this fully succeeds, it should drop me straight into session 4 here in just a moment. And there we go. Excellent. Okay. So now that I'm in here, I actually need to kind of take it a step further. And this next step is I really need to migrate to a more persistent, elevated process. So I'm going to run PS and look at all the different processes. You can see I've got a whole bunch of stuff here. Again, we've gone through quite a few of these, so we can make this nice and easy and just look for search I, as in search indexer. Now, the search indexer is a process that holds system level permissions. So not only do I gain a little bit of persistence here, but I'm also gaining the elevated permissions that I really needed. So I'm really paying attention to this 5320. And all I need to do at this point is migrate 5320. And now I'm at the search indexer process. I have my elevated permissions, and I should be good to go from here. So back to Andrew.
Great, thanks, Brandon. Local exploit suggester. I don't know, every time I hear it, it sounds like something you would expect to hear over a police scanner, right? So what we're going to do now in our pathway to establishing some persistence on this machine is we want to do that in a relatively subtle way. And one of the ways that we're going to do that today is we're going to take a look and see, are there any interesting applications that this user might run every time they log into a machine, say. And the easiest way to do that is actually just to go take a look in that startup shortcuts folder. I think Brandon's probably muted his mic now, because what you cannot hear is him grumbling about how many backslashes he is having to type. That is right. We're doing all of this live. This is all real stuff. Brandon, we will get you that new keyboard one of these days, just as soon as that backslash key runs down to a stump. And what we're going to do is we're taking a look and seeing what is in that user's folder. And there it is. And and actually that's pretty good. So they have an application called Putty. In fact, they have a shortcut on their desktop for it as well. That's pretty good. They must use that application a lot. That is a really good application for us to target for a couple of reasons. One, we know the end user uses it a lot. It's in their startup and in their desktop. But two, Putty is also a pretty slowly updated application. So we can actually make some changes to this application. And the likelihood is the end user is not going to update it for quite a while. So what we'll do is we'll jump into that folder and we can actually download that executable. We could, grab the hash of it, go compare that online. But as Brandon said, we're lazy hackers. It's only a few hundred K. Let's just download that. So now that we've got that saved right here in our folder there, what we need to do is launch another utility. And to be safe, we're going to do that in an alternate window. And we're going to run this application called Shelter with 2 L's. What we'll do with this is once it comes up, we'll go and put that into automatic mode. And we'll feed into it that file that we just downloaded. And this is the folder that file just got downloaded into. Now, Shelter here is doing a couple of things. It's going to look through this application. In fact, it's about to run a tracing mode. So what it's doing is it's looking through that application and it's looking to see, are there any places in that application, logical branches in code, but also physical space where we could inject a payload and obfuscate that payload from the rest of the execution of that application. The payload that we will want to use is a reverse shellcode payload, so a remote connectivity payload. So you see, Shelter, the name Shelter is a pun, and I love a pun because it's sheltering, it's hiding, it's doing this thing called code caving. So it's taking our payload, which itself is a shell, and it's sheltering. So it's sheltering that shell payload into our executable here. Get it? Because it's
Oh, buddy, it's okay. You
it's
killed it.
shelter.
It's
We're taking it too
successful.
far.
Yeah, it's dead. It's
I
dead.
gotta fill 60 seconds somehow. Thanks for the thanks for the intervention. I'm sure everybody else is really thankful for that intervention as well. We have a few more options to choose here. We definitely want stealth mode. That makes sure that everything else in the application continues to work as expected. We'll use this built-in Meterpreter listed payload, and we'll just choose the very first one, that reverse shell over TCP. Next up, it wants us to put in the remote host. That's the IP address or the host name of our Kali Linux, our command and control server. So we'll just throw in our IP address here. And like all good attackers, we're going to use port 443. You may have seen a recent Sophos report come out from Sophos Labs that well over half of all malware is now using TLS or SSL connections, and we definitely want to do that. So we've created that new version of PuTTY now, and what we want to do is go back and upload it. It doesn't look like PuTTY's running on this system right now, which is great. We can just upload it straight into the folder that we're already in. So we're already in that program files folder. We'll upload it. We'll get that file uploaded, and maybe we'll need that a little bit later. Who knows? Perfect. So that file's now been uploaded and it's sat on the system. So with that, it's now ready for us to do some more stuff. It's ready for us to take a look and see if there's any other things on this system that might be interesting. So in time for question 3, Faith, I'm going to hand it back to you.
All right. So for poll number 3, what should we do next? Should we look across the network for more targets, look for interesting files locally, or monitor the end user's activity? Let's see here. This is always an interesting one.
This gives us the creepy factor of the audience, doesn't it? It's always very interesting.
So it looks like look across the network for more targets has taken the lead. So I will go ahead and end the poll. And that will be what we do next, look across the network.
Network Recon. Well, that's great. Thanks, everybody. So one of the interesting things about Network Recon is we don't want to just light up a port scanner and start spraying the entire subnet or the entire LAN segment. We want to be a little smarter about that. And one of the things that we can do is we can start by looking at potential places on the network that this user, that this computer connects to a lot. There's a couple different ways to do that. One is to look at what other applications they might have on their system. Now, we already know they have PuTTY, but let's take a look and see, are there any other interesting applications on this system? And I definitely see a couple, I think. I can see the Remote Desktop Connection Manager. That one's super interesting because that collects multiple details for Microsoft Remote Desktop. There could be a lot of servers in there. The other one is if we scroll up a little bit, perhaps do we see the old Filezilla client in there as well? We do. That's great. So Filezilla, actually I feel Firefox. Filezilla is this other application. There it is. It's an FTP connection. So those are 2 really good applications for us. And we'll start by, again, using just one of the built-in modules here. And let's take a look at that Filezilla one first. And we're going to go, and Brandon's going to run this command for us. Now, what's super interesting with this is, yes, we've had success. We just extracted the server name, the protocol, so we know it's an FTP. It looks like it's the web server, and we have a username and password. That, judging from the username, that looks to be like an admin account. That's really great. This is extracting those credentials. This is the default behavior of Filezilla. You can add a layer of encryption to those Filezilla settings. If we had found that, this would have actually extracted the hashes for us, and we would have just need to take those hashes over to a tool like John the Ripper, and worst case, we'd be brute forcing them for somewhere between minutes and hours. But this user didn't, so we've got some great credentials to start using. Let's go take a look at that remote desktop server as well. So we're going to run another one of the built-in commands. It's going to do something really similar and see if there's any saved sessions inside of that Microsoft Remote Desktop Connection tool. So let's see, that is running through, and oh, well, that's interesting, isn't it? You know what? That's because we, so super interesting. We can see that we're still in the context of system right here. And the reason we're in that system context is from doing the exploit mitigation earlier. But this setting, there is some encryption in these files, but this particular setting, and that encryption, sorry, is user specific. So, you know what I think we need to do, Brandon, is let's migrate into a different process. We've done a bit of this before, and OneDrive is a really good process for this. So we're going to do just like you saw earlier. We're going to look for that OneDrive process, and we're going to go and migrate over into that. And then let's try that same command for the remote desktop connection manager. Let's see if this works this time. Perfect, there it does. So now we've migrated back out to that user context. And actually, we have a couple of interesting things there. Two servers, one of them is a domain controller. It looks like we've got an admin account. This is fantastic. Let's test one of those accounts out. I like the look of that Office file share server. So what we'll do is from here, we'll actually drop into a local shell on that remote machine. And we're just going to do a ping. We're going to ping that fully qualified domain name of Office server and our domain. That's going to give us the local IP address. And there's actually something pretty cool that we can do with that if it had worked. So that's a little strange. Let's just try. We know the IP address, don't we? Let's double check. Can we ping the IP address? I think it should be, what is that one? 10, 10, 11, 10, I think. Sorry, you know what it is, Brandon. 11, 11, 10, 10. My mistake completely. Okay, so, oh, and we've lost our session there. So Brandon's just going to jump back in and get that session reestablished. What's happening here is when you hit the Control-C button, it actually causes part of that Kali side of things to break out. And unfortunately, that happened to us right there. But looks like actually that may have happened again, Brandon. Where are we? Yeah, we've actually kicked out of the SE Toolkit there. So what we'll do is I will do a little bit of talking while Brandon's going to get this set up back for us. So what we're doing is just redoing some of the prep work that we did a little bit earlier. When we do that, we'll use that particular session, and we'll be able to do something that's called pivoting. So what that's going to mean is, you saw us earlier, what we had to do was drop down to a shell inside of that local machine. Well, wouldn't it be great if I could do things from my Kali machine as if it were connected to the same LAN segment, or perhaps even better, what if I could use that Windows 10 target machine almost as a proxy server to be able to send traffic out of that particular proxy? And I'm running commands on my Kali machine, and then I'm able to have the traffic leave that local LAN side. That's pretty good. So, so what we'll do is, now that we've got that session, actually, I think we're good, Brandon. We probably don't need our privileges again. So we can just jump into our session there. And what we will do is let's just do a quick get you ID, and let's just see who are we in this context. Perfect. So we're back in that user context. Now we're here. What we're going to do is enable this networking module. It's called auto route. So we're going to go ahead and run that that native auto route command, and that's going to start setting up that proxy capability for us. Let's get that configured. Perfect. And then we need to jump back out and make some other configuration changes inside of the Meterpreter environment itself. So we're going to enable the actual proxy server now. We need to make a couple of tweaks to the configuration, set it up on a particular port locally. That just helps keep it a little bit more simple for us. And then we're going to go ahead and run that. So we'll get that configured onto the right port, and we'll go ahead, run that. And now what we can do is we can actually open up another terminal window. And from here, we can run the local remote desktop client, and we can tell it to be encapsulated inside of that proxy connection. So we're going to go over it. We're going to run this remote desktop over to the IP address that we know for it represents that machine. We're going to see a real remote desktop connection. So there we go. We've been able to establish a remote desktop connection from that Kali machine through the Windows device, which is really cool. We've got a username and password. Let's go try that username and password and see, is our file share admin account going to help at all? So let's get those creds in, and let's take a look and see, have we been able to make remote desktop connectivity to this device? We've not. Okay. Maybe if we'd maybe chosen the password credential theft earlier on, maybe we'd have got another couple of passwords to try. But I think for now, we'll just have to close that remote desktop session, and we'll maybe see if we can get back and see what we might be able to do for that, about widening our attack a little bit later. So let's jump back in, and we'll just get back into our session here. And I think we were doing session number 3, weren't we? And now with that, keeping an eye on the clock, we don't have too much time left. So we just have time, in fact, for one more thing. But don't worry, we'll make this one exciting. What we need to do is decide how should we end this attack. So Faith, I'm going to pass back to you for our next poll.
So time for the fun stuff. So what malicious payload should we deploy? Do we want to go with ransomware, malware, or launch an attack on a network resource? Let's see who's still out there and ready to help us here. So no surprises here. Ransomware has taken an early lead. So it's looking like that's going to be our plan. So go ahead and end the poll there. Execute a ransomware attack.
Ransomware it is. All righty. With that, let's talk a little bit about what we have to do for a ransomware attack. So the first thing is, we're going to be targeted in this particular attack as an example. And to do that, we need to know where should we go and target. So let's do a bit of a search across this machine and see, are there any interesting, let's choose documents. Are there any interesting documents on this particular machine? We can use the built-in search command for that. If you were watching closely, you'd have seen that reply came in lightning fast. It's actually quicker than the local Windows search. It's super creepy. So, and you know, we have found something interesting. We have found what looks to be a cyber security insurance certificate. That's really exciting for 2 reasons. Number one, it tells us this organization potentially has a cyber liability policy. The second is, means they've got some money to pay out on a ransom for us. So maybe there's other interesting things in that same documents folder. So let's go take a look in that user's documents folder. And we're going to browse over into documents, and we'll do a quick ls. And oh, you know what? Let's see. What else do we see? I see passwords.xls. I see a license agreement, and I see a vault code. That stuff all sounds really fun and really interesting. But we got to stay on track, stay on business here. From the Kali side, let's actually download that cybersecurity certificate. Again, if you hear any gnashing of teeth, this is Brandon thinking, why, oh, why did he agree to make the file name that long? Let's see. Oh, copy and paste. Love it. So we've just downloaded a copy of that file. Again, locally, what is it? 100K or so. We've got that downloaded. Let's go and look at it in our local file browser here. We actually have an Office application installed here. Let's see, there it is. So let's get that opened up. And what do we see? We see, oh, this is really great, right? $1 million insurance certificate. Is it valid? Yes, it's valid. It's valid for 2 years. Okay, this is great. We now have no doubt that these folks are ripe and rife for a ransomware attack. And with that, to take you through the actual mechanics of the attack and a couple other things, I'm going to hand you back to Brandon.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. And sorry about the hiccup earlier. That's what I get for hitting Control-C way too often.
This is what we get for in the prep call saying, yeah, maybe this is a high wire act, literally what somebody said. So we're all good. Thanks so much.
So for the ransomware attack in general, it's actually pretty simple. We've got an exploit pre-built out that'll kind of walk through this. Now, we've designed this one specifically to walk through it slower so you can actually see it step for step happen. And essentially what I'm doing here is I'm already actually from the Kali side, I'm already down into actually see Sophos documents. You can see everything here, all the stuff that you're seeing over here on the left-hand side. Now, one of the really cool things about our protection is it actually does point in time replacement of any corrupted files. So to show that, we're actually going to open this cybersecurity insurance doc and go ahead and type something like, how about gonna get paid? There we go. So we'll close that off. We'll save it. Now, if I reopen it back up just to verify, gonna get paid, it's saved. Point in time, done. Now, as far as the attack's concerned, super, super simple. Run, encrypt. I'll kick this off, and what it's going to do is you're going to see it actually attack the first file, and it'll come in here, and it should change the extension here. Unless...
Oh, I noticed we're actually in the wrong folder, Brandon. We're in C threat, not documents. So jump into the documents shortcut on the desktop.
Oh, and that's why. There you go. So you see it change to OWND, owned. We see that happen here. Once we see it happen on the third here in the password.xls, you should actually see action take place. Starts to kick it off. You see the documents fully restored. We're back to 100% and no edits. So we're done. Good to go. And that's the encryption over and done with.
Great, thanks, Brandon. And yeah, you can see that was returned into the original version. You didn't see the edit there because we actually just did it in a slightly different folder.
But, yeah, I made the mistake and threw it into the wrong documents folder. That's why you didn't see the edit. But I can rerun it again.
We might need to reboot for that, because actually the way that that detection and that protection works, and there's more stuff happening right now, and we'll talk a little bit about that, is whenever a file gets encrypted, what's actually going to happen is we're going to take that just-in-time backup copy, and when the file gets written back, we're going to compare our just-in-time backup copy with the original version, with the newly written, potentially newly encrypted version. And just like the baseball game, you get 3 strikes as a file encrypting process. When we make that detection, and you would have seen that pop up there, ransomware blocked, and actually interestingly, it was in PowerShell. So when we see that happen, we do a few things all at the same time. The first thing that we do is actually stop that application from making any more system changes. So right now, PowerShell isn't allowed to do anything else on this system. The second is we've launched a full system cleanup scan. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The third, and the most important part of all, though, is what you just saw with those files being reverted to those just-in-time backups. Now, we didn't pop up a message to the end user. We didn't make an administrator go into a console and click a rollback or a replay or button like that. And one of the reasons we do it that way is, number one, it's just way more simple and way more effective. But also, we are not relying on volume shadow copies. So we're not using the operating system feature. And this feature is both on Windows and Mac, and we're using our own proprietary method for both of those. The reason that's important is we're able to secure all of that stuff with our tamper protection. And we mentioned the tamper protection a little bit earlier. What we've seen in lots and lots of attacks is attackers, one of the very first things they'll do after they've escalated privileges is they'll actually look to disable the volume shadow copy service, as well as purging any of the old backups. So a lot of the time we think maybe that those VSS copies are good. It's maybe just a little bit more of a safety blanket. So the final thing I mentioned was Sophos Clean, and Sophos Clean is now running on this system, and it's doing a couple of things. It's working its way through all of the local telemetry that's on the system. And what it's able to do is detect other files or other things in memory that might be related to this attack. And you can see right as I said that, Sophos Clean finished its scan, and the impact of that was that we lost our session on the right-hand side, on the Kali machine. Our attacker, pardon me, has now been disconnected. So the attacker no longer has any remote control over this machine. But I know what you're all thinking. You're thinking, aha, we chose way back in question number 2, we said we'd like to establish persistence on this device. And by the looks of it, that was a great call. So if you remember, what we did was we took we took our own copy of that PuTTY file, we added it through this code cave process, and then we uploaded it. So now all we need to do is wait for the user to reboot, and we know PuTTY's in the startup, or we already know the end user safely has PuTTY saved right here on their desktop. So let's just go do what the user would do. Hey, I'm back from lunch. I need to jump in and do something on one of my remote servers. Let's fire up PuTTY and let's see what the oh, okay, we got a detection. So super interesting. That code cave detection. Now, we actually have turned off the file scanner right now. So that's not a file scanner detection. We would expect that file to also be detected by the file scanner. But this detection is actually that branching. You know, I mentioned when it was going through that tracing mode, along with the really bad joke, that what it was doing was looking for logical places to break out and run our code. That's what just got detected. And because we chose stealth mode, we didn't have an option, because we chose stealth mode, what we saw there was the application trying to run completely by itself and launch that code cave detection. Launch that part of the code caved application, and that's what led to our detection. So I'm taking a look at the clock, and we don't have too much time, but we just have enough time, I think, for one last thing to talk a little bit about. And what I'd love to do real quick is just talk a little bit about some of the stuff you heard at the beginning from Mitch. You heard about red teaming and blue teaming and you know the unison of those into purple teaming. Well, what we want to talk really quickly about is from a threat detection and response perspective. If we were all a human threat hunter, a group of human threat hunters, what might we have been able to do to detect this attack while it was still in motion? And we'd love to show you what that looks like. But of course, we need your help just one last time. So Faith, if you could kindly launch the final poll of the afternoon for us. And everybody, this is the time to take off those virtual red hats and get on those virtual blue hats as we switch to the other side and become threat hunters.
All right, so for the last question of the day, which type of activity should we hunt for? Unusual network connections, unusual PowerShell commands, or behavior from a known exploit? So let's see who's still out there. So unusual network connections has jumped to a pretty substantial lead. So I think it's safe to say that will be our winner.
Perfect. So thanks very much for that, everybody. And let's take a look at what that looks like. So Brandon's navigated over to Sophos Central into the live Discover, and he's going to go in and launch this query for us, which is going to look at all of the open connections for our machine. Now, normally we would go out and we would target every machine in the environment. Specifically, what we've done here is we're just looking at one other machine. This is not the machine that we just attacked. This is a different machine out there on the network. So we're going to go ahead and run this query. And what we want to imagine here is I'm a threat hunter. I'm going through that threat hunting process. And really, I'm just looking for stuff. I'm looking in this case to see, are any of my applications, are any of them making interesting looking network connections? And actually, I think I see one right down there at the bottom, Brandon. Is that's our that's PowerShell, isn't it? If we hover over the application, okay, so that's PowerShell. The reason I recognized it was it's actually connecting out to the IP address of our command and control server. So that's definitely some troubling news for us. Now, what we would have known is we'd have seen that IP address when we went through the investigation of the threat case that would have been generated. So let's grab that Sophos process ID, and we're going to go run a query. It's called building out a process tree. And that process tree query is going to tell us exactly where that process came from. What were the series of events that led to that process? And we'll probably have to cover this quite quickly, as you would imagine, and you'll see a pretty good amount of data. There's a ton of other data in here. But as we look at this process, I can see there's PowerShell right there, with that fourth up. And as we trail our way back up, it actually starts to look pretty familiar. We see a bunch of PowerShell things. We see this MSHTA thing, and then above it, we see Word. And in this command, we can actually see the file name that Word opened up. So we now have a really good idea of the file that was received. And we know it came from email because Word's parent was Outlook. So I know that was super quick, but there's a quick idea of how you can take a piece of intel from a threat case, or that could be from any other third-party intel. You can imagine doing that with the hash of a file or something like that. We are right up with time. I want to say a big thank you to everybody. I want to say a big thank you to everybody out there for joining us. I especially want to thank Brandon and Faith for all of their work through the webinar, Mitch for teeing us off really well, and Faith, I think I'll hand back to you just in case there's been any questions and any updates that you need to let everybody know.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Andrew, Brandon, and Mitch for a great session today, and thanks everyone for joining. So I don't see any outstanding questions in the Q&A, but if you do have any additional questions, please keep an eye out for a follow-up from us. As a reminder, there will also be a drawing for the Nintendo Switch, so a member of the team will be reaching out to the winner shortly after the session. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.